Welcome.
If anybody was listening last week or watching last week, you were probably on the edge of your seat waiting for Peter Bales to tell a story he's told 5 times already on this podcast. But I told him it doesn't matter because I'd love to hear it again because I forget what it was. It was about a comedian that he really was madly in love with in the late 70s, and it was Henny Youngman, right?
No, Henny Youngman. Henny Youngman, you know personally. I mean, Henny Youngman.
No, not anymore. They buried him.
Oh, well.
Well, they had to. He was dead.
Well, the story was about.
That already got more laughs than your stupid Chris Rock.
Not Chris Rock, Chris Rush. Chris Rush was an inspiration to a lot of comedians, not only on Long Island, but across the country, because he was so new and so powerful and so different and so, quite frankly, nuts. He was at the bitter end in New York City, and this is the story that I've told before on the show.
Don't remind them.
I've only told it one other time. The Seinfeld story I told 3 times. That was an error.
Why don't you throw that in?
Okay. Now, in those days, he went up.
You are, at some point, are going to remember we have a guest.
We have oh my God! It's just like, who's this guy?
Yeah. I introduced him last week. I can't repeat myself.
This is right. You're right. You're absolutely right. Before I tell my story.
Don't be shocked when I'm right, Bales. I'm always right.
Okay. Before I tell my story, we're going to bring in the incomparable John Blenn, whom we love, who is a playwright and historian, a critic, a writer.
By the time you list his credits, the show's over. This is John Blenn. Look him up. Google him.
He played shortstop in Little League. Is that too much? All right, anyway, we're so pleased to have him. And I'm going to tell this quick story, and then we're going to delve deeply into the mind of John Blenn.
The first time Chris Rush saw me at the East Side, I was hosting, and I came off, and he walked up and shook his head. He says, "A Nazi telling Jew jokes and killing." He says, "I never laughed so hard. It's nice to meet you." I said, "Thank you." He's about this tall, bald. You know, he wasn't intimidating. You didn't have to worry about your girlfriend running on stage and making out with him. You know.
And actually, he would wear a tracksuit on the stage because somehow I guess that made him look thinner or in shape somehow.
Yeah, it did.
Total bald head, very weird-looking guy, great guy, and he goes on stage at the bitter end. And in those days, you could smoke on stage. He takes out one of those thin cigars, and he takes out his lighter, and he starts to try to light it, and the lighter will not work. It just won't work. He's very frustrated, and he goes, "Damn Japanese lighters." Little laugh. And at that moment, unplanned, an Asian man stands up in the audience, walks up on stage, takes out his lighter, and lights Chris Rush's cigar. And Chris looked at the audience and said, "Now that's what I call a warranty." I mean, that deserves.
Oh, that's just beautiful.
He was a genius. He really was.
Now, have you ever read his biography?
I
Because
think I
that.
think I have.
That was a setup.
I think
that was a setup.
Yeah.
Yeah, that guy worked with him.
Oh.
Yeah.
He had to do that every show.
Yeah, and then after the show, he sold rice. Oh, I don't know who it was.
Anyway.
But that is a funny ad-lib.
Anyway, but as I say, we have memories here today that go back to the 80s and 90s.
So that you're not going to tell that again?
I'm saving it for the show
John
after.
Blenn is such a talented, wonderful man. He's been such a delightful presence in the show business world of Long Island forever, and we are thrilled to have him. We have not had many guests. We had Danny McKenna, who was the chief bottle washer in charge of everything at Rascals Comedy Club, until one day they woke up and realized they had hired him. But John has been around forever, and we're not taking any guests. Everybody, we don't want to have another comic come on and say, why the chicken crossed the road. That's my job.
Right. So. And we think you are going to be more objective than we might be or another comedian might be about the changes in comedy since the 80s? What was good back in the 80s? What was, hey, great back in the 80s?
I'll simply sum it up by asking you guys a question on the 80s as opposed to now. Then, as opposed to now, how often do you stop in your tracks in a club and go, wow, that is an unbelievable bit. Oh, that is an incredible piece of writing. Or, hey, that's a really unique personality.
You're leapfrogging. I would never go into a club. I go to a club to see.
Yeah, but I mean, you might be headlining and there's an opening act. How often do you see somebody in front of you where you go, well, there's something special. There's something I haven't seen before.
Every time you work with me, you say that.
I say that about Bales. But
but you were part of that 80s magic that we were talking about, so.
Very, that has I mean, I was on the same show as Kinnison in 1980 or something like that, and
Right.
and that was crazy and things. But that stuff, or the first time you see Otto.
Right.
Otto and George was an X-rated ventriloquist, or dirty ventriloquist, but it's
was
very
dirty?
rare. It's very rare you see, But of course, the people they put up in front of me, it's not really fair. I am pretty shocked
Right.
that they're up there.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like the object is not to talk for 5 minutes. The object is to talk, get a laugh, talk, get a laugh. It's not.
I thought the objective was to entertain, and a lot of guys seem to
it's
miss
just-
that point.
I
There's
can
people that go
still.
up there and they talk and talk and talk, and finally the audience laughs because they figure, I guess we really should. It's like it turned on a light in a dark room. It's like.
I can still be impressed in the clubs today, but your point is well taken, John. It's different now. Stage time for new comics is so hard to get. And
Yes and no. I mean, there's a lot of new comics out there that are playing the bucket of bloods, if you will, that we got a mic over there in the corner in between the end of the bar and the pool table.
And the only people in the audience are other comics. Who are
Yeah.
away.
I've
And
been
you-
in a lot of those lately.
I know,
lot.
and you can. It's useful.
I booked those in 1979, but that was before there was such thing as a comedy club.
Right.
And that was the only reason anybody
Exactly,
got to
because-
work is because I was putting on those shows. The first one we put on is where I met Peter when we did the first show at Cinnamon, which was an amplifier and speakers in a restaurant, and that morphed into the East Side, and that was the first time a suburb actually had a real comedy club per se, and but even back then the guys were good and the people semi enjoyed it, but the concept of when I first heard the concept of paying to go on stage, or you got to bring people with you if you want to go on stage, it's just like, ooh,
Didn't
I
exist.
thought it was weird enough that Milton
When-
Berle had his mother in the audience.
That didn't happen in the 80s and most of the 90s, so-called bringer shows.
Right.
The fact is,
The Bringer show was more like, no, you're not getting comp.
that's right.
You're my friend, but you're not getting comp.
That's right, but certain things happened. I mean, we discuss it, we try to figure out what killed the boom.
Right.
I think it was probably, Jackie said it, too many clubs.
And too much comedy on
And
Yeah,
television.
evolution of cable starting in
once
81.
cable happened
Yeah.
and you could say anything you wanted, the whole world changed. The entertainment world, to me, changed dramatically, because when I started my dial joke, 516-922-WINE, I put on dirty jokes to promote Cinnamon. And they called me up, and they actually called me by my first name, because people kind of knew me from Long Island. And they called, Jackie, it's too dirty. So I made it a little gentler, and they called me like 2 days later and said, it's still too dirty. I made it a little gentler. But then as the time went on, I made it dirtier and dirtier, because all of a sudden there was HBO,
Right.
and all of a sudden there are girls on TV with bare breasts, and you're sitting there with your parents, and like the whole world loosened up, and dial joke just got just really all the foul jokes, because just everything, and all of a sudden on TV, on those cable shows, not all of them, but a lot of them, you could do whatever you wanted.
Right.
And they, the way I used to say it was in the 70s, if you turned on the TV and you saw a brick wall with a guy standing in front of it doing jokes, you wouldn't budge.
Right.
And by the mid 80s, if you were turned on the TV and you saw a guy standing in front of a brick wall, you couldn't change that channel quick enough. It was almost that drastic, remember?
And there were lots of one-nighters, and audiences realized, and I think comics realized, how funny you are is way down the list of who gets booked on a show.
Right.
It should be number one, but it's not. It's way down. I mean, when you get booked because you have a car,
Right.
what are they doing?
But no, but that's how it was when we started.
Well, yeah. I mean, Jackie had a car, or he would have had no career.
Career.
really.
I would have had no friends.
But
You were the guy that drove the Seinfelds and the Reisers out from the city to come out and make money at our stupid shows.
That's
know?
right. Thank God I had a car.
Yeah.
In
In high
fact,
school, that's how you had friends.
In fact-
First guy with a license, king of the hill.
here's a
You bet.
story I haven't told. I had a Volkswagen.
This isn't you and the fat broad in the back seat.
No, I've told that a lot.
Yeah.
Now, I had a Volkswagen Bug, engine in the back, one of the old ones, that I got for $300, and it was rusted through. The floor was rusting out, and it was sagging, and you could see through to the road. And I was driving Seinfeld from the comic strip over to 44th and 9th, the Improv, and we were cutting through Central Park through a puddle. And we went through the puddle, and water came up through the floor into where he was sitting in the passenger seat. And I saw him react like that. Now, anybody else would have cursed, what's going on? What? Would have gotten really mad. Seinfeld turned to me exactly like this, and in a very Seinfeldian way said, "Correct me if I'm wrong, but I am inside the car." Only Seinfeld.
And he has such a good sense of humor about it. You'll notice that Bales was never.
On a show.
Because when I,
But that is so him.
when I know
Even
famous,
if you're lying, that's so.
no, it's not. It's absolutely true.
Correct me.
When I know famous people, I go the other way, and that's my issue.
You
in
venture forward with
in
the truth.
therapy. Well,
You venture forward.
I got to tell you, I once kissed Rosie O'Donnell.
Okay.
I'm telling you, when I first met her,
I know. I was on the other side of her when you kissed her.
that's foul. Anyway.
Well, you didn't see me
No,
because
but
I was kind of
she
like.
was. When I met her, she was lying about her age because she was underage. I think she was 16, and I was a little bit older. And we were in an improv group together. Long story short, a couple years later, and she was very cute.
so this is before she started lying about her weight.
I love Rosie O'Donnell.
I know you were going to say
And
that.
I leaned forward on her driveway and I kissed her, and I'll never forget. She pushed back a little bit, looked at me, and said, "I think I'm going to go in another direction." And it is just so important to me that I really.
Now, you assumed that meant. She might have meant another guy. Not you, Peter. I have another guy in mind. You're kind of inferring
No,
that
I
she was
affected.
going to take a different
I
road.
influenced comedy history.
Yeah.
I, for the record, I love Rosie. I met her way back when, super talented, and she's another one of those products from Long Island.
And she's great. And she is great.
And she fed me the most ridiculous straight line I've ever gotten. The only reason I got cast in the movie A League of Our Own is because I could switch hit. And I said, "That's for sure." And she didn't intentionally feed me that line, and she laughed.
That's too perfect.
Too perfect. So, do you have favorites, John?
Comedians?
Yes.
Wait,
well,
before
yeah.
because I'm trying to remember.
Wait, we can have a whole show without involving our guest at all.
I'm trying to remember. Did you ever?
You're almost there any minute now.
Did you ever give it a try? Did you ever go up and try and do comedy?
I have. Just did basic stock stuff, talked a little bit about some things. I talked about the students that I taught at the school without naming names. I talked about working at Westbury Music Fair, so it was just more conversational stuff.
Yeah.
I have had a lot of students, and I'm sure you've had it all the time too. I've had a lot of students over the years going, "You should be a stand-up professor." It's like, well, you incorporate ideas of that. When I first started teaching, realize you're going to lose them in a hurry if you're not interesting. And the fastest way to be interesting to them is find funny stories to tell them. So once you reference their point of view, it makes it very easy to teach them the curriculum you got to bring.
Right.
So I enjoyed doing it, but I never had any drive. I was always, I think probably because I grew up playing sports a lot as a kid. I played hockey and football and baseball in particular as a youth. I always thought in team projects. So I wrote with the idea to do theater. I wrote with the idea to shoot little movies and things along those lines. These days, I think we have a proliferation of comedians because it kind of parallels sports. They grow up wanting to be like BMX bicyclists, or they want to be solo athletes.
Just them.
And they want to be solo on stage talking about whatever it is they want to talk about. And I was always more interested in a lot of moving parts and how you put that
It
together.
is such a different headset. All through high school, excuse me, in college, and then all through the 70s, I was in a band. And then it became a two-man band or a three-man band, but it was a very small band. And when we finally broke up, you don't realize, even though you're at war a lot of the time, it's incredible camaraderie.
Yep.
And that's all you know. So does a fish know it's in water? And then all of a sudden I said, all right, we're on the verge of breaking up. I'm going to start doing some gigs on my own, just with my guitar and telling jokes. And all of a sudden I'm driving to gigs by myself, and I'm not even exaggerating, like tears in my eyes, like I'm all alone here.
Right.
You know, like where's the, you know, you have a miserable time. That's funny on the way home.
Yeah.
You know, if there's somebody sitting there.
Right.
You know, and then comedy, of course, it's so alone. You know, it's a whole different headset. It is not a team sport.
It's not, but you have a lot of social interaction with the other comics. Hanging out, waiting to go on is such precious time, and that's when you talk, because you do share what Jackie just said. I relate to, but when does he have time to talk about that to somebody else? Yeah, at a show or when you're hanging out with other comics. Now you have seen so much of this. I saw something you posted the other day on social media. I turned to my wife and I said, my God, John Blenn reminds me of Zelig. And you know exactly what I'm talking about, right? You seem to be,
We're
I've
going
never
to stop
seen,
right here.
I've never seen,
Because this is going to be such a great show. John Blenn as Zelig on the Long Island entertainment scene is a show not to be missed.
well, we should explain who Zelig is. He's someone who is everywhere. A Woody Allen character in a movie who is everywhere. I've never seen somebody in so many cool photos.
That's Zelig? I thought Zelig was the little guy in the Superman comic. Who's that?
We're going to work out this confusion. We've got a lot more
It's
coming.
my
with-
job to make him crazy. And it wasn't a big enterprise.
Mission accomplished.
We've got more with
Mr.
John Blenn.
Mitzelpick. It was Mr. Mitzelpick.
That's right. I remember that character. Has nothing to do with Zelig.
Who's
now-
Zelig?
Next week, we're going to find out who Zelig is, and John Blenn is Zelig. And wait till you hear-
Gellis. That's Zelig backwards. Gellis.
Yes, it is. We will see you next week. Hey, a new episode of Stand-Up Memories every Wednesday.
How exciting is that?
Starring me, Peter Bales, and right here, Jackie the Joke Man Martling.
Please follow us on social media. Search it out. What is it? Me Space?
MySpace,
Your Space?
TikTok, Instagram, Facebook.
Doodah, doodah.